Exalted 3rd Edition has long been criticized for being the only Exalted game without a storytelling chapter. While it was probably cut due to the book size, it was still a huge oversight and something that the game truly needed. Crucible Legends was meant to rectify that mistake, but unfortunately it took 7 years to do so. I've seen mixed reviews of the book so far, and my initial reaction when first skimming through it was a bit skeptical. However, when I took the time to actually dig deeper into it, I came to appreciate a lot of what it offers. It doesn't resolve every issue that I wanted resolved, but what it does offer is mostly valuable, and I think it is a must-buy for those of you who are still running 3rd edition. This video isn't intended to review the book's storyteller advice though. I'll make another video about that at some point. No, in this video I'm going to review the optional rules and rules changes presented in the book. I'm also going to offer some suggestions of my own that could be helpful in streamlining your Exalted 3rd Edition experience. Exalted 3rd Edition is a big game with big rules, and it can sometimes take more time to resolve an action than it's worth. The core book has a sidebar on Simplified Combat, but it's sometimes useful to simplify action resolution even outside of combat. Crucible Legends suggests that whether you should use simplified roles instead of full subsystems depends on the player's investment. If someone has invested deeply in a particular set of skills, they will likely want to use those skills in-game, and the storyteller should accommodate that. However, sometimes it is more interesting to save certain subsystems for more narratively impactful circumstances. This is useful both for narrative flow and to have the rules feel more impactful when they're used in full. If you would use the full combat rules for every guard in the palace, things would get stale fast, and the character would likely run out of resources before the story even gets interesting. Instead, simplify action resolution and take out the guards with a mere roll instead of the full combat rules. Once you get to the guard captain, or once you're surrounded by an alerted battle group, that's when you bring out the full rules. I mentioned the importance of simplified roles in my combat approach video, and I'm glad that Crucible Legends is pointing it out. It's important advice that makes running Exalted much more smoothly without detracting from the greater subsystems. You get to feel more powerful and amazing when easily overcoming the minor challenges, while you may still experience the full subsystems when it's dramatically appropriate, making those moments more engaging and impactful. The book doesn't only present ways to simplify play though. For example, it expands upon the presentation of difficulty levels for action resolutions, and it even suggests that Exalted characters should automatically succeed on difficult 1 to 2 tasks if they are within their areas of competence. This doesn't mean that the storyteller should inflate the difficulty of basic tasks to 3 or higher, only that you should reserve rolling at all for more serious challenges. The core book only lists difficulty levels up to 5, which is considered a legendary success. Crucible Legends presents ways to interpret difficulty levels for 7, 10 and 15 successes. As for difficulty 7, the book suggests that storytellers should use that difficulty for challenges that stretch the boundaries of what they believe are possible for mortal heroes, and that are remarkable for the Exalted. Examples include lifting a boulder the size of a character, taming a tyrant lizard, sailing through a hurricane while under attack from wrathful sea gods, solving a famous philosophical conundrum or mathematical question by introducing a fact, surviving a fall of thousands of feet, translating a text written in a language lost to time, or climbing the Imperial Mountain. As for difficulty 10, the book suggests that storytellers should use that difficulty for challenges that are entirely beyond the realm of possibility for even the most highly skilled mortal heroes, and which requires considerable exertion even from the Exalted. Examples include lifting an elephant, solving a profound mystery of creation of worlds beyond by introducing a fact, performing brain surgery with Bronze Age tools, drinking Josie venom without suffering harm, running a marathon in an hour, or climbing the Imperial Mountain amidst a hurricane. Finally, as for difficulty 15, the book suggests that storytellers should reserve this difficulty only for the most arduous and legendarily challenging tasks, those that are only just possible for the Exalted. Examples include bashing through a fortress wall, swimming across the inland sea without rest, taming a behemoth whose only purpose is destruction, breaking a mystical seal forged by the enemies of the gods, performing a surgery beyond what modern medicine can accomplish using only Bronze Age tools, swimming to the bottom of the Great Western Ocean, gaining fluency in a language lost to time by studying an untranslatable text, bypassing the Jade Pleasure Dome security measures, and the like. I don't have much to say about these guidelines other than that they present valid expressions of higher difficulty levels. When you play Exalted, you roll 5 successes so often that it doesn't really feel legendary. These guidelines are more there to emphasize the potential power of the Exalted and what you should be able to expect from truly legendary actions. Crucible of Legends offers an alternative way to approach stunts with the goal of making higher level stunts more obtainable. A 2-point stunt can be earned by meeting the requirements of a 1-point stunt and incorporating the environment or another aspect of the scene into the stunt's description. Incorporating cost marks, aspect markings, or elements of anima banner count as the environment for this purpose. For it to be a 3-point stunt, it should also align with the defining intimacy. Players can be awarded 3-point stunts only once per scene. I think this is a fairly clear guideline on how to approach ordinary 3rd edition stunt rules. The book offers an even simpler alternative though. All stunts become 1-point stunts by default. Each player can designate a stunt to be a 2-point stunt once per scene and may designate a stunt to be a 3-point stunt once per session. The overall results would be the same as in the core book, but here the players have agency over how the stunts are awarded. Since stunts can be intimidating for some players, you may not want to use them at all. If that's the case, consider awarding willpower when a player or character fails a roll, engages with a new game mechanic they haven't tried before, or takes an action that underlines an in-character relationship. Both characters get it, and it can go above one's maximum willpower rating. If you're introducing new players to the game, it could be a good idea to start with this to encourage initiative taking until the players are more comfortable describing grander stunts. Another aspect of 3rd edition's rules that Crucible of Legends suggested to simplify is anything that relates to time limitations, such as certain craft construction and social projects. Here you will need to consider how your game depicts narrative time. If there are no opportunities for time to pass, characters will be locked out of certain forms of project progression. Instead, deal with time limitations as dramatic elements. When would it be most appropriate for the crafting project or the sources working to be completed for the story to be the most interesting? If you only have 3 days to drill the villagers before the bandits attack, why should it matter that the training time should really be over a week? Have the PCs accomplish it in the 3 days, because that's more interesting. If you want some form of compromise to avoid just letting the PCs get away with major projects in next to no time, add risk trackers to increase the tension. What are risk trackers? Let's take a look at Crucible Legends project rules. There are project rules in the Exalted 3rd edition core book, but Crucible Legends offers mechanical options to supplement or replace those. The mandate of rulership is an involved subsystem that makes use of progress trackers and risk trackers to make narrative projects more engaging. I'm not going to go into every little detail of the subsystem, but I'll summarize the main parts. A progress tracker is a way to mechanically represent the character's long-term efforts, projects and plans. It's an adaptation of the extended action rules with several changes. A project that makes use of progress trackers has 3 main components. First, the progress tracker itself, which indicates where in the process of being finished the project is, rated from 0 to 10. If you're starting a project, the progress tracker should reasonably be at 0, but this isn't necessarily true. There could be contributing factors that make the storyteller decide that the project has partially been completed, such as having suitable land to build on, a framework already in place, or having access to raw materials to use. Second, the scope of the project, which is rated from 1 to 5, and it indicates how wide-ranging it is and the interval of each project role. A Scope 1 project is personal or local, Scope 2 is citywide or regional and affecting hundreds of people, so on until Scope 5, which affects entire directions and many thousands of people. Third, we have the hardship of the project, which is rated from 1 to 5 and represents external factors that could make the project more difficult. Mechanically, hardship should determine the task's base difficulty. Narratively, it should determine potential opposing factors, such as political rivals or disgruntled underlings. When a project leader's lowest relevant merit is lower than the project's scope, the project's hardship increases by the difference between the two. This is called scope mismatch. Sometimes certain assets can help offset this, letting them reduce the scope mismatch entirely or partially. For example, a character with low resources could potentially offset the increased hardship by tapping into a wealthy ally, causing them to sponsor some of the project. Each interval when the project leader can dedicate some amount of time to personally direct the project along, they roll against the project's hardship and apply successes to the progress tracker. If the character or their allies undertake other dramatic actions during play that could ease the project along, the storyteller could let that reduce hardship. Once the progress tracker reaches 10, the project is completed. A project can also have something called risk trackers, which represent growing threats to a character's plans, assets, or well-being. These can be paired with progress trackers at the beginning of a project. Each risk tracker has an interval, which is often paired with that of the progress tracker. It has a doom, which indicates what will happen if it fails and the threat becomes realized. This is some destructive event that negatively affects the character, the circle, or people and places around them. Finally, there's a risk value which indicates how many dice are rolled and that ranges from 1 to 5. Any successes on this roll adds to the risk tracker. Once it reaches 10 or higher, the doom triggers. If paired progress trackers and risk trackers complete on the same interval, a crisis occurs. This is a situation that requires the character's direct involvement to prevent the doom. If the character overcomes it, the project completes successfully. This is a very surface level explanation of the new project system, but I think it's a great change to make projects more narratively involved and less of a downtime activity. The idea of progress and risk trackers can also be used to aid the storyteller in managing adventurous journeys. The idea is to create interesting complications and opportunities for the journeys themselves, rather than simply fast-tracking from A to B. When planning a journey, the players and storyteller need to determine distance, potential complications, and potential opportunities along the way. The characters then put successes for each leg of travel towards minimizing the hardships and benefiting from good fortune. Distances are measured in abstract, with short journeys representing trips that someone could walk in a matter of days, moderate journeys of those a rider can complete within a few weeks, long journeys of what a guild caravan might complete in a couple of months. Finally, epic odysseys represent rare travels that can span multiple directions and last for seasons or even years. The distance should decide the general travel time, as well as the number of rolls the journey will take. However, instead of making a roll after a set interval, each length of a journey offers a different number of rolls for the group. 1 for short, 3 for moderate, 5 for long, and 10 for epic. If the group has access to special vehicles or magic, the travel time could be reduced by entire steps on the scale. For example, a long journey could be treated as a moderate or a short journey, depending on what kinds of resources, artifacts, or magic the circle makes use of. The travel rolls can use different attribute and ability combinations depending on the nature of the journey. It's common with stamina or wits for attributes, as well as ride, sail, or survival for abilities. All PCs are expected to make these rolls. If they don't, non-rolling characters can add to the base difficulty for the other rolling characters. This could be depicted as someone relying heavily on the expertise of someone else to survive the journey, or someone sitting in a carriage while someone else drives it. The more non-contributing characters you need to carry along, the harder your task and the more inconvenient your experience. You could counteract this added difficulty by the presence of actively useful storyteller characters, such as caravan hands or merchant guards. These can now reduce the difficulty instead of adding to it. The storyteller determines complications that may lie ahead. These are ratings from 1 to 5 as well as an internal value. You resolve a complication by spending successes from the journey roll equal to the complication's rating. If a number of journey rolls pass equal to the complication's internal rating, the complication occurs instead. An example from the book is to add a complication called the journey takes longer than expected. Unless the players buy it off, a journey that was expected to take weeks could potentially take months instead. Journey rolls can also be combined with risk trackers represented by things like active pursuit, mobile threats, or other concerns. Like with projects, you can use successes from ongoing progress trackers to reduce the hardship for the next roll. This could be represented by moments of planning and consideration to make the journey easier. Crafting was one of the most criticized subsystems in Exalted 3rd edition, where the design philosophy behind it was to emulate crafters who constantly multitask and never stop creating new projects. Juggling project slots and crafting experience became a chore that just wasn't fun. Crucible Legends introduced an optional simplification of the crafting system. You no longer need multiple craft abilities. Instead, you get a general craft ability to create things and acquire specialties for what would have been the individual craft abilities in the core book. So instead of getting a craft ability for blacksmithing, you get the original craft ability and may add blacksmithing as a specialty. It's not mandatory to get specialties to create objects of that type, but you need to get an artifact specialty before you can start making artifacts. You also need an apprenticeship to learn that specialty in the first place. When it comes to crafting experience, there's no more silver, gold or white. Instead, you earn a generic type of crafting experience of the course of your project, rather than when it's finished. A project that requires a single roll doesn't require crafting experience to be completed, and a project that requires an extended action works differently from the book. Rather than a goal number, you get a crafting experience total that you must meet to purchase the completed project. Each time you succeed on a roll within an extended action, you gain 1 plus extra successes crafting experience to maximum 5 per roll. Repairs cost half as much as building something new, unless particularly complicated, extensive or difficult. It seems like the idea behind this change is to minimize the amount of charm errata required, since charms that interact with crafting experience can still be beneficial. The crafting project's intervals are measured in narrative time, such as scenes, sessions and stories, instead of actual time. This change is there to make crafting projects useful in more time-constrained stories. I'm not going to go into these rules more than this in this video, but you can expect a more in-depth analysis once we get to a future crafting video. I'm still not sure about crafting, but these changes are for the most part good, since the old system is such a hot mess. I'm still not happy with even the new version of the crafting experience, but I need to dig deeper before I make up my mind about it. I haven't playtested it. However, the book also presents a sidebar for suggestions on even further streamlining, where you cut the crafting experience entirely and use goal numbers like before. This feels more in line with what I want from the system, but it would require more fiddling with existing craft charms. The Exalted 3rd edition core book never had any established teamwork rules. According to Crucible of Legends, basic teamwork would let a character assist another. The character making the roll can then use the assisting character's specialties, even if they are tied to other abilities than the one being rolled. Additionally, the assisting character can spend 1 willpower to add an automatic success to the roll. This can stack with the rolling character spending willpower to add a success as well, but you cannot benefit from more successes this way. An alternative form of teamworking is to let the assisting character roll a relevant attribute plus ability against the same difficulty, but before the acting character. Any extra successes are added as non-charmed dice to the acting character's roll. If the assisting character fails, they instead inflict a -1 penalty to the roll. Multiple characters can assist, but only the highest extra successes on any roll are added to the acting character's roll, while the penalties for failure are cumulative. This type of teamwork action is meant for more dramatic actions and not for opposed actions in combat or social influence. When engaging in teamwork for an extended action, like a crafting project, the assisting character rolls for an interval using a relevant attribute plus ability combination. The acting character can use this roll's successes in place of their own if it's higher. If an assisting character fails the roll, that failure subtracts the success from the acting character's roll, as well as from any other assisting characters. Alternatively, the storyteller could determine that an assisting character can help reduce the time necessary to complete an interval. Assisting characters could also contribute their own craft points towards project slots if you're using the craft rules, or their own experience points towards the cost of sorcerer's workings. The social influence rules are one of 3rd edition's strongest subsystems, and a clear improvement when compared to previous editions. However, there is still much to the system that is complex or open to interpretation. Crucible Legends helps to clarify certain aspects of the social influence rules, such as how to interact with narrative time and how to apply unacceptable influence or the red rule. The book also offers guidelines on how to approach a social scene through emphasizing social goals. By establishing the social goals of participants early in the scene, refer to them as well as related intimacies when dictating character actions. If there is no clear social goal, then consider if it's necessary to use social influence rules at all. The book also elaborates on how to use willpower to resist social influence. For example, minor characters such as nameless goons shouldn't spend willpower at all to resist social influence unless it might endanger defining intimacy. Major characters, such as important village elders or regional ministers, may spend willpower to resist influence only if it endangers a major or defining intimacy. The storyteller should favor the PCs in this context. Even if it makes sense for a storyteller character to spend willpower to resist the social influence, the storyteller is advised not completely shut down the player's efforts. Instead, offer alternative paths to success or compromises to help further the pieces along. Crucible of Legends offers a suggested optional rule called Influence Overwhelming in situations when groups are unhappy with storyteller characters having the option of spending willpower to shut down social influence. This rule suggests that for every 5 threshold successes on an influence roll to create, destroy or change a storyteller character's intimacies, the willpower cost to resist that influence increases by 1. This stacks with charms and other powers that increase the willpower cost to resist social influence. It does not affect decision points. I think it makes sense to have a rule that makes more powerful outcomes of social influence be more difficult to resist, but this doesn't really resolve the issue some players may feel that storyteller characters can resist such influence at all. I think that an alternative optional rule could be some kind of benefit for a player invested in a social influence role that succeeded but still ended up being resisted. One such benefit could be to have half the resource expenditure spent on the action redeemed rounded down. For example, if the player spent 10 motes on one willpower on their action, succeeded on the roll and the storyteller character ended up spending willpower to resist, the player should redeem 5 motes. Alternatively, they could get some kind of narrative benefit at the storyteller's discretion or a non-charm dice bonus on a future roll made against the target. If you've seen my previous videos on Exalted, you should probably be familiar with the fact that I strongly believe that the intimacy system in 3rd edition and Exalted Essence is more than enough to portray social intrigue. Virtues were a thing in previous editions of the game, and they were brought back into Exalted Essence without offering any meaningful mechanical weight that wasn't already covered by intimacies. They are system bloat. I know that some people like them. I think they are superfluous. According to the description in Crucible Legends, virtues were extremely popular in 1st and 2nd edition, which is quite the embellishment. In my opinion, they are still superfluous. I am super curious about learning the design decision behind adding them because I want to change my mind. So, how do they work? 1st and 2nd edition had 4 virtues: Compassion, Conviction, Temperance and Valor. The ones added to Exalted Essence and now 3rd edition are Ambition, Compassion, Courage, Discipline, Justice, Loyalty and Wonder. They are meant to act as a moral compass and trigger limit rolls when the PC goes against them. In other words, just like intimacies. The virtues aren't represented as actual traits on the character sheet, but rather as narrative guidelines. You don't get to have dots in them. Instead, the book suggests that you choose the 2 virtues you feel resonate the strongest with your character and draw inspiration from them when choosing intimacies. It also suggests that you take note of which virtue is more closely related to each of your intimacies. When using social influence, the book suggests that you consider the different virtues to flesh out motives and tactics. For a more mechanical benefit, the storyteller can award you a non-charm success if it makes narrative sense for a virtue to enhance your influence roll. When using an intimacy associated with a virtue to bolster resolve against the influence that opposes the virtue, the character gains +1 to resolve. The storyteller may also choose to increase the resolve penalty when the influence aligns with the virtue. The same applies to Guile. If the storyteller thinks that the virtue is applicable to Guile, it can apply a +1 non-charm bonus or a -1 penalty. Finally, if the storyteller thinks that the virtue should enhance an attempt to read someone's intentions, you could get a non-charm success from that. Once per story, a player can also choose to cite a virtue instead of an intimacy in a decision point. These suggested mechanical benefits of using virtues during social influence ultimately comes down to general bonuses or penalties as a reward for appealing to a virtue. It's not a real mechanical subsystem like intimacies are. Everything mentioned here can already be done using intimacies, with the exception of perhaps having them enhance an offensive action. By having virtues add a single bonus or penalty here and there is just the illusion of mechanical weight, when it really doesn't add anything meaningful at all. Exalted 3rd edition is already a complex system. By slapping virtues onto it like this, you're just making a mess of it. If you want to add virtues to 3rd edition, they need to be distinguished further from intimacies and made into a meaningful subsystem that has an impact on gameplay. The Great Curse is something that I always forget to keep track of when I run Exalted of any edition. Most of my players have ignored the limit triggers as well, hoping that I will keep track of them, which I never do. It's not that I don't think the Great Curse is fun, it can cause some interesting character moments. It's just a hassle to keep track of in a game where there already are so many things to keep track of. Fortunately, Crucible Legends come to the rescue with some rule hacks. The book suggests alternative ways of reducing limit apart from accomplishing legendary social goals or using certain powers. One suggestion is that PCs lose 1 to 3 limit at the end of a story. The longer the story and the more the PCs accomplish in it, the more limit they should lose. Another suggestion is to have characters lose a limit when upholding and defining intimacy, though this should be limited to once per session. A third suggestion is to have a character lose a limit if they take an action similar to something they might do while under the effect of limit break. In other words, something irrational, self-sabotaging or contradictory to their own goals. Because this is likely to cause some form of narrative obstacle, reducing a limit is a fair reward. A fourth suggestion is to lose limit as a result of a bargain with the storyteller. Similar to the previous suggestion, this should be self-sabotaging in some form. If the players gain limit too frequently to be fun, another rule hack to slow down the limit gain is to only have them roll a single die for limit when they meet their limit trigger or act against a major defining intimacy. Also, only have the characters roll for limit for acting against an intimacy once per session. I think all these suggestions are valid, but my personal problem with limit is that I tend to hand it out too infrequently. Losing limit or slowing down limit gain isn't really a priority when my players don't get any to begin with. Crucible Legends has a rules hack for this as well. One suggestion is to add a die to all limit rolls, another suggestion is to double 9s on all limit rolls, or double 8s if the character has less than 5 temporary willpower, or even double 7s if they have no temporary willpower. A third suggestion is to assign a character a limit if they have experienced significant stress in a scene, though this should be limited to once per scene, and you should stop handing out limit this way if they've already undergone limit break that story. A fourth suggestion is to end the session with each PC who didn't gain any limit that session having to roll a die for limit. Out of these suggestions, I think my favorite one is the one where you assign a limit of the significant stress and have players roll for limit if they haven't gained any during a session. Those would be much easier for me to keep track of as a storyteller than to having to navigate the limit triggers of players who are tight-lipped about them. The book offers another rules hack called Player-Driven Great Curse that puts all the responsibility in the hands of the players. Here, limit isn't tracked at all. Instead, the players have the option of role-playing the effects of the Great Curse when and how they wish, and in doing so, they earn an expression bonus. This rules hack is only recommended for players who enjoy this kind of roleplay and who are mature enough to not use it as a reason to ruin other players' fun. The Great Curse shouldn't be an excuse a player can point at to justify bad behavior. Also, if you decide to use this rules hack, you need to address some mechanical implications for charms that interact with limit. The book presents some suggestions for how to approach such charms. I'm not going to go over those suggestions here, but it ultimately comes down to alternative resource costs or more narrative complications. Conditions are an optional system that replaces flaws from the core book. These can be long-term or temporary, characters can acquire them during the game, and they often come with narrative criteria to be resolved. A condition is meant to be like a miniature story arc where the character goes through a harrowing or intense experience that reflects on personal growth. The resolution criteria are recommended to encourage appropriate dramatic beats. Once the condition is resolved, it should award an experience point. Most conditions are meant to be resolved within a story, but sometimes characters can suffer persistent conditions as well. For each story in which the condition remains unresolved and has complicated the narrative in some way, the character gains an experience point. For example, if the character is blinded and hasn't resolved that condition, they gain an experience point if some complication occurs as a consequence of that condition. Maybe their companion is kidnapped and they are unable to follow the tracks. Conditions can come into play most obviously through limit break. A 3-point stunt could also let the player inflict a condition upon another character, such as causing the bad guy to catch on fire. The PC then gets a willpower once it's resolved instead of an experience point. Conditions can also come into play as a result of botches, gambits, story events, and instead of flaws during character creation. I think this is a great change, mainly because conditions feel more multifaceted than flaws and flow more naturally with the narrative experience. They don't have to be represented as concrete abilities, but rather narrative prompts and complications that affect the story in some way. It's also a healthier way to approach various disabilities and other conditions than to simply refer to them as flaws, which is not always the experience of those who have them. While lore is technically the fact-knowing ability, Crucible Legends suggests that other relevant abilities can be used instead if the facts are related to those abilities. For example, melee could be used to know facts about the mysterious school of swordsmanship, while bureaucracy could provide facts about economics or political structures. Lore can always be used for as long as the character has an appropriate backstory or lore specialty. The book also elaborates on the rules to introduce and challenge facts. This is a very useful, but in my experience underused subsystem in the core game, and I think that the reason for that is that it isn't intuitive for most players. According to Crucible of Legends, introducing a fact should offer at least one of the following rewards: introducing a new narrative element, such as a trial by combat or the existence of a nearby ruin. It should forward the plot, such as providing the general location of a certain treasure or offer an alternative path to solve a political dispute. It should generate intimacies, such as having a librarian be more gracious towards the PC due to them worshipping the same god. When it comes to challenging facts, the book suggests that it can be a great addition to social or intrigue scenes by having certain characters offer incorrect information to support or bargain rolls intended to advance their own agenda. The idea is for the PCs to control some of the flow of information by challenging details provided to and by storyteller characters. While I do get what the book is going for, I think this section could be elaborated on further as well as have concrete suggestions. I don't think the way it's presented here helps to elaborate on the rule from the core book. One of the main issues with the 3rd edition combat system is the way initiative works, and Crucible of Legends addresses this by introducing the idea of non-traditional initiative and initiative roster. Unfortunately, these only relate to the turn order in combat, which isn't the main issue, and it fails to address initiative as a resource. Non-traditional initiative uses the same method of determining turn order as Exalted Essence, where you agree as a group who goes when and where you gain a benefit by going last. The storyteller can interject with certain storyteller characters by having them spend initiative. I've never been a fan of this method, but there are those who like it, so it's there as an example. An initiative roster method lets everyone roll like normal, but the roles define placement slots that can be filled with other characters than your own. I've never been a fan of this method either, since I don't find it immersive, but it's there for those who want it. I think my preferred method, if we're no longer relying on initiative or dynamic placement, would be to simply keep the placement that you rolled unless you choose to delay your action. I would have liked to see Crucible Legends offer this method as an even simpler system, but it's neither here nor there. The turn order isn't the main issue after all. After having run plenty of combat scenarios using 3rd edition rules, I've noticed that the fact that initiative is your resource for damage, while it can be consistently withered down, becomes problematic when facing multiple aggressors. Exalted Essence solved this by replacing initiative with power, and by letting characters retain power until used instead of losing it to withering attacks. This is really the kind of change that 3rd edition would need implemented, but changing it would require a lot of charm revisions, which isn't realistic if you want to avoid a massive scroll of errata, as with 2nd edition. Crucible of Legends tries to find a compromise by adding an optional rule where someone with low initiative can spend an action to raise their initiative up to a maximum of 5. This is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't resolve any of the issues in practice. If you're already withered down by multiple aggressors, you would only put yourself in more risk by replacing your attempts at coming back or escaping with a guaranteed few initiative that don't really put you in a reliably better spot against your opponents. The steady action, as it's called, will rarely if ever be a better choice than attempted withering attacks, unless you already know that attacking would be pointless. First, it takes up an action, which only delays your aggressors. Second, it doesn't put your opponents in a worse spot. Third, it's also not allowed when you're crashed, making its use extremely narrow. Giving more options for low initiative characters to turn the tides is a good idea though, but I think it would be better to provide some form of passive benefit instead of enforcing a new type of action that doesn't do anything other than having you regain a few points of initiative. What if you let someone with an initiative lower than a certain threshold benefit from an initiative bonus upon a successful attack against someone with a higher initiative? And maybe increase the bonus if they're outnumbered. What if you let them passively regain initiative upon successful defenses, like some charms do, with even more initiative gain if they are in full defense? I know that some of this can be resolved with charms, but I do think that this kind of optional rule would be a better and more engaging way to avoid withering abuse than the proposed steady action. While I do appreciate what the book offers, unfortunately it doesn't do anything that would convince people to come back to 3rd edition if it's the combat rules that push them away. The steady action certainly isn't it. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not enough in its current form. What 3rd edition would really need is the power system from Exalted Essence. Crucible of Legends also has optional rules for simplifying combat movement. Rush and disengage actions are only rolled if an enemy chooses to contest them, and trivial foes can't contest them. Disengage still costs initiative, even when unopposed. Characters can rise from prone reflexively on their turn without a roll. It counts as the reflexive movement. No roll is needed to take cover unless the cover cannot be reached easily on foot. This counts as the character's movement action. Finally, withdraw actions are entirely changed. Instead of using the standard rules, a character at long range can withdraw as an unrolled movement action that cannot be flurried. It also costs 10 initiative. At the start of the next turn, if they are still within long range, they successfully escape from the battle. If an enemy enters medium range, they must make an opposed dexterity plus athletics roll against that character to successfully escape. If an enemy reaches short range, the withdrawing fails automatically. I think these changes are for the most part good. I did a video on positioning in combat a few years ago, and it turns out that a lot of people have misconceptions about how combat movement works in practice. I still think that withdrawing from combat is too difficult and conditional, and that it should be an actual option with narrative consequences. The book addresses player death with some new options on how to tackle it. When suffering a fatal blow, the player states whether they accept that he's killed the character. If they don't, they are only incapacitated. The player must then describe how they survive what was thought to be certain death. If the player accepts death as a possibility, things proceed like normal. If the player declares already at the beginning of combat that they are willing to accept death as a consequence, they gain a +2 bonus to their base initiative for the fight, including as a bonus to join battle. The storyteller may allow players to make this declaration if a fight's circumstances change dramatically. The storyteller may also apply this rule to significant antagonists meant to be recurring. It's recommended to negotiate with the players about the antagonist's place in the narrative rather than just saving them out of the blue. I think the latter bears the risk of making players' actions feel useless if overused. Sometimes a storyteller needs to learn how to let go of their favorite storyteller characters before they start hogging the spotlight. I've sure made the mistake of growing too attached to certain storyteller characters, and it's never been good for the game. There are a few optional adjustments to improve and speed up 3rd edition Naval Combat. This also gives other crew members the opportunity to participate in the battle instead of only having it be between captains. In each round of Naval Combat, a naval maneuver roll can be made by any PC or important storyteller character aboard the ship, not just the captain. The first time during the scene that a given character rolls a naval maneuver, its momentum cost is discounted by 2. If it's a positioning maneuver, it grants 2 additional momentum. Positioning maneuvers are more effective, always granting a minimum momentum equal to the ship's maneuverability, even if the action is unsuccessful. A successful roll also adds the number of successes to the total momentum gained. Several maneuvers have more trait options to pull them off, making it possible for characters without sail to make effective maneuvers. For example, broadside maneuvers can now be rolled with perception or wits plus sail plus maneuverability, dexterity or perception plus archer plus maneuverability, or charisma or intelligence plus war plus maneuverability. Escape maneuvers can be rolled with intelligence or wits plus sail plus speed, perception or wits plus survival plus speed, or intelligence or wits plus lore plus speed. There are more maneuvers as well that can be approached with new traits. I think that this is a good change overall, since it allows other PCs to be more involved in naval combat scenes and allowing more traits to be used to also encourage new narrative approaches. This also means that naval maneuvers can be enhanced by appropriate charms from other abilities than sail, such as using an archery attack charm to enhance an archer-based broadside. Charms referencing decisive damage would allow the maneuver to deal 2 hull damage. War-based maneuvers can be enhanced by charms that improve command actions. Charms that affect navigation can be used with survival-based escape maneuvers. The storyteller is also encouraged to allow the use of certain charms even if their associated ability isn't represented by the naval maneuver roll. For example, an awareness charm could be used to improve a broadside in a low visibility environment. The book also points out that maneuvers can be further modified by stunts, such as having a dawncast hurling a crate of cargo at an enemy ship's masts being represented by a broadside maneuver rolled using strength plus athletics, brawl or thrown. Overall, I think the suggested adjustments to naval combat are great, but the default system itself is worth talking about in more detail. I hope to be able to get to a naval combat video at some point. The book suggests an approach to Gambits that make them more valid options for non-combat characters. They can be rolled with an attribute plus ability combination that makes sense. You could distract someone with a manipulation plus presence roll to mock them, disarm someone with dexterity plus larceny, or unhorse someone with strength plus athletics by dragging them from the saddle. This approach lets players make Gambits beyond the range of their weapons and combat traits. This change also lets the targets of Gambits defend using appropriate opposed rolls or static values, such as using Resolve against a presence-based Gambit, or Stamina plus Ride against someone trying to drag them from their saddle. Distract, Disarm, and Unhorse Gambits no longer require initiative rolls. Disarm and Unhorse Gambits don't have initiative costs, except against significant enemies like Exalted antagonists. If the storyteller wants to strengthen Distract Gambits, an optional rule could be to have every point of initiative spent grant 2 initiative to the Gambit's beneficiary. Exalted 3rd Edition's mass combat system is a great improvement when compared to the messy slog of previous editions. This book doesn't need to make many changes to how battle groups work. What it does offer are some clarifications on routing, rallying, and dissolution. It suggests abiding to the following steps. First, when the battle group takes enough damage to fill its magnitude track, it loses a size and makes a willpower roll against rout. If it succeeds, it doesn't suffer any further detriment. 2. If it succeeded on the rout check, the process ends there. If it failed, it's routed. Third, between the time the battle group is routed and its next turn, its leader and allied heroes can use rally actions to avert the battle group's dissolution. If a rally action succeeds, the process ends. If no one manages to successfully rally the battle group before its next turn, it will suffer dissolution. This means that the battle group breaks down and disperses or surrenders to the enemy. It's no longer participating in the fight. There are a lot packed into this book, a lot more than I could cover in this already lengthy video. I don't think there are any outright bad changes, and even if there are, they are easily ignored. The book didn't resolve every issue I had, but it added a lot of good, and it definitely added some things that I will be happy to incorporate in my games. Has it done enough to fix Exalted 3rd Edition though? Unfortunately, I don't think it's done enough to bring people back who has quit the game for various reasons, but it's a great resource for those of us who still love the game. Now, I made this video before the final errata had been put into Crucible of Legends. I originally intended to wait until the final version was out just to avoid inconsistencies, but that took a bit longer than I'd expected, and I wanted to get this video done. If there turns out to be major changes in the final book, I would be happy if you could comment below if you spot any of those inconsistencies so that people who come across this video can get access to the latest, most up-to-date information. Anyway, if you like this video and want to see more, make sure to like, comment, share and subscribe. Also remember to sign up to my Patreon if you want access to more content. I've also opened this channel up to members where you'll get the same kinds of benefits as you get on Patreon. I know that videos have been infrequent lately, but I work on a lot of stuff besides the channel, and I need to finish up some other projects before I can shift focus more on videos. My health is better than it was last year though, so I think some things are going in the right direction. Anyway, until next time.